What up? Blizzard has put out another update to the 12.1 TTR this week, and it has some really important changes to the base game, some tank changes and fixes and buffs and stuff, and a massive reshuffle to Prot Paladin Talents. There's a lot to talk about here, so let's go ahead and get right into it. But first, be sure to like and subscribe, and hype the video if you're on mobile, it really helps us out. Okay, so let's talk about the quality of life improvements. So they made this big post about it, and they even talked about the stuff that they've already put into the game, which there is some stuff that has definitely been really good for the game. You know, maybe there was some stuff that needed to have been put in before the beta even ended, like increasing XP for players, but you know, some other good stuff in here too, like reducing repair costs. Fine, whatever. Moving on to what's going to be in the coming patch, there's a couple of really awesome things that have been, you know, kind of an annoyance for like close to, what, 21, 22 years now, such as auto loot being an account-wide setting instead of something you have to change every single time you make a new character. Now that's just going to be kind of their attempt to bring this game forward into the future. You know we're never getting WoW 2, we're playing the WoW 2 we already dreamed of, and this is one of the million different things that they could do to make this game feel a little more modern. And of course, as they say, they're starting with this, but they're going to look at a whole bunch more account-wide UI settings in the future. I'm sure this will be the case for many different UI components as well. Additionally, there's something that I don't see listed on here, which is a new text-to-speech. I had not noticed this earlier in playing on the PTR. It is sort of doing what it wants while playing on the PTR, and here you go, have a sample.
Monster Hands, level 90 Death Knight. Doornogle, button, 2 of 10. Butt foot, level 90 warrior.
So there you go. It's a little weird that it was turned on automatically and doing that, but it was fun to hear the machine read my character's names. So no complaints. I'll probably leave that on, even if it doesn't come to enabled by default. Another really nice change is that auction house filters will persist after closing and reopening the window. Again, one of those things that you never really could like articulate, like, this is driving me crazy, but then they say, hey, we're changing this, and you go, oh yeah, that has been driving me crazy. And then of course the biggest thing that drives people crazy throughout the history of World of Warcraft is getting stuck in combat, and that's something that they're looking into fixing in the coming patch, and we love that. So let's go ahead and get into the actual tank changes, and the first is to the BDK Tier set. Because basically, prior to this point, they didn't really have a tier set bonus. They had some auto attack speed. It was horrible. And it was horrible in a way that couldn't really, like, be repaired. You know, they'd have to buff it by like 10,000% or whatever to actually make it be any good. So they've given a new tier set to Blood DKs, although it's not in at the current moment, and they do want feedback, and so this is a little bit of a chance to give some of that, and also just kind of talk about it and think about what it actually does. So the two-piece is a little bland, which is actually pretty normal for two pieces. Like, that's not really a bad thing for them to be a little bland, kind of intended. Four pieces tend to be a lot more exciting. Two pieces are just like kind of, you know, a basic thing that then usually gets, like, you think about the history of WoW two-piece design, they're usually like 2 to 3% more damage, and then the four-piece doubles it or triples it and makes it a lot more interesting mechanically. So that's exactly what we have going on here. When you Death Strike, you get a stack of a buff that gives you 0.5% of strength, up to 5%. When you hit 10 stacks, you then get your next Marrow Rend to consume all of those buffs and give you 10% strength for 10 seconds. Okay, so we kind of spent some time thinking about this and just mathing out our own experience of playing Blood DK, and also looking at logs. So on average, you're casting Death Strike every like 3 to 5 seconds, more like every 3 to 4. So if we just said 3.5 second average cast time on Death Strike, if you immediately, upon hitting 10 stacks, like you hit 10 stacks, bam, Marrow Rend immediately, no time wasted at all, then this is going to be up for 10 seconds out of every 45. You know, you'll have 35 seconds where you're effectively averaging about 5 stacks of this 0.5% strength bonus, so we'll call that 2.5% strength for 35 seconds on average, and then 10 seconds of 10% strength. So just mathing that out, very basic, like just type it into the calculator app and add it all up in your head numbers. That puts us at around 3.5 to 4% increased strength overall, which is not amazing. It's not horrible. You know, it kind of hits in that range of about 2.5 to 3% increased damage out of a two-piece. But it's not like super exciting or anything. You know, hopefully they'll have some like hooks in the UI to where like when you hit 10 stacks, it makes your mirror rend glow so that you have kind of an indicator there, or there will be some buff that you can track through the in-game whatever we call it, Blizz auras, and that'll work for, you know, making it be a little bit of a rotation changer, but not really, right? If you're playing Blood DK, you're pressing Death Strike a lot, so that's pretty much that. And then the 4-piece is where things kind of get a little bit more underwhelming, because like this is not amazing, but it's a 2-piece. It's totally fine for what a 2-piece should be. The 4-piece makes it so that when you consume Blood Debt, so basically every 45 seconds, more or less, your next Marrow Rend will generate 3 Bone Shield charges and deal shadow damage to your target and nearby enemies. So the issue here is we don't know how much damage that is. Blizzard probably doesn't even know either. So there's that. But basically this boils down to being about 4 extra Bone Shield charges a minute. That's not a lot. Yeah, that's pretty underwhelming, ultimately. And I think, you know, just in looking at this, it basically averages out to, yeah, about 3.5 to 4% more strength over the course of time. And then, of course, there are some other things to consider, like if this is a buff that has a duration on it, and it's not like really long, like a full minute or something, then in Mythic Plus or any fights that have an intermission, you might lose stacks, in which case the value of this just absolutely craters. In Mythic Plus in general, a lot of the time, you're not actually getting to Death Strike like very frequently as much, because you might just be moving between things or grabbing mobs or something. Like you are, of course, going to hit Death Strike a bunch anytime you're playing a Blood DK, but it's not quite as consistent as like single target raid fight, right? All of this adds up to a package that is a pretty underwhelming set of bonuses. It is a huge upgrade compared to the non-bonuses that Blood DK had available to it before. Like, hooray, they finally got a tier set. That's great. Big upgrade. But it's not as good as some of the other tier sets, as Bear Druid or Brewmaster Monk, like not even close. The difference here is that this is very fixable numerically. Like, the mechanics of this are fine. The fact that you have to Marrow Rend at the end of it is maybe a little underwhelming. You know, I think if this 4-piece was just baked into the 2-piece, that would be pretty cool. Then, of course, they would need to make a whole new 4-piece. There's also the potential that if they just added in one extra line of this 4-piece that basically just said, all of this stuff in the 2-piece, it gets doubled. And then also the stuff in the 4-piece is true. Or if the 4-piece shadow damage is just like really hard, it's like, oh yeah, actually it's a nuclear bomb's worth of damage, then it's great. Right, so there's a very fixable tuning component to this, even though it's a relatively simple pair of bonuses. This is very fixable from a tuning perspective. So ultimately, this is like a much better design than the tier set that existed for Blood DK before. So in terms of the Vengeance Demon Hunter situation, you know, once again, they are kind of moving things around. They're basically shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic for old Vengeance Demon Hunter. It really needs some more like consistent defensives outside of defensive cooldowns, and what it's getting is just kind of shuffling around the way that sigils are working. Sigil of Chains is going to be baseline. It will no longer replace Sigil of Misery. Instead, Misery and Silence will be exclusive with each other. You're able to get cooldown reduction on Sigil of Silence a little bit, and Sigil of Chains is going to be just a baseline 60-second cooldown, so technically there's another AoE grip class in the world that's like somewhat competitive with Blood DK, but not really. So yeah, that's pretty much it for Vengeance. You know, still kind of missing the plot there, really. No meaningful changes for Bear Druid. They apparently are fine, even though they seem like they're completely overpowered. They are apparently fine, and Monk is like so good that it doesn't even need to be mentioned. And then we get to Prot Paladin, which is the last one. I'll go ahead and just say that, like Warrior, they made one really awesome change for Warrior, which is that Revenge now also procs off of auto attacks. This is awesome, and it's a huge upgrade for Colossus. And they've also made Ravager give you a little bit of extra damage again, but mainly this is just Revenge is super duper awesome. So let's talk about Protection Paladin, because there's a lot of stuff in here. Greater Judgment lasting for 18 seconds instead of 15, whatever. Guardian of Ancient Kings has a half-second cooldown. That's just so that you don't you can't double tap it super fast and use both charges, but half a second, I could definitely still do that, and I literally just did. So there's that, then there's bug fixes, and more bug fixes, and then there's the talent tree. So they have massively shuffled the talent tree, and just to show those off, this is the new talent tree over on the right-hand side, and this is the old one, and you can see pretty significant differences. However, that's not all. There's actually some pretty substantial stealth buffs in there as well. So just to like show off some things, Undying Embers, you're healed for 100% of the damage you deal with Refining Fire. There has also been like a nerf to healers in kind of a roundabout way where they're buffing everybody's health and everyone except for healers healing and self-healing and stuff. So tanks have gotten a bunch of self-healing increases that are numerical self-healing increases, but are not proportional self-healing increases. And that's not the case with Refining Fire, because it's going from like 100% of damage with, or Undying Embers going from 100% of the damage that Refining Fire does up to 125. That would have been about proportional. But then it's going up to a maximum of 300% as your health decreases. So you get a really substantial increase in the amount of healing that you get out of casting Avenger Shield and AoE, which is great. They've really kind of reshuffled a lot of stuff on this left-hand side of the tree as well. Like Soaring Shield has been moved up from its old position, like kind of down and to the left. It's now been moved up and more into the middle. Like it's more of a intentional travel node, because it is understood. You are taking Soaring Shield if you are in AoE at all. As a protection paladin, it should be a high-level travel node. Additionally, they've changed some of these travel nodes, you know, Refining Fire, and also this new talent, Blessed Word, and Valiant Crusade. These are like basically mandatory gate nodes to get out of the top third of the tree. And obviously they weren't before. They were using like Seal of Charity as a mandatory gate node to get out of the tree. You want to get out of the top right section of the talent tree for Protection Paladin, you have to opt in to healing people with Word of Glory, even though they also want to disincentivize that elsewhere. Right. Of course, there's more. There's also this new talent, Seal of Reprisal. It's not really new, but it's completely redesigned. Instead of just being a bad little Blessed Hammer damage increase, it's now just a straight up 10% damage reduction buff. And even though it's not quite a travel node, you're guaranteed to want to take Crusader's Judgment if you're playing a Protection Paladin, and it is mandatory. So what they've basically done here is they've taken Protection Paladin from the way it was before, and they've baked in some like more effective self-healing tools like Blessed Word and Light of the Titans being like pretty much mandatory travel nodes to get to Crusader's Judgment, which is a talent that you absolutely want to have. Additionally, you're getting 10% damage reduction built in there as well. So Prot Paladin, just off of this handful of very small changes to pathing in the upper section of the tree, you know, taking Undying Embers, which has now been buffed, it's much tankier than it was before. Just more damage reduction, more self-healing built in. Then there are all of the changes that they've made to cooldowns in the PTR so far, that, you know, make it do a lot less burst damage, which is kind of weird, but then way more sustained damage. So all in all, looking pretty good. Where things get a little funky is down in the bottom section of the tree. So we have a couple of talents that we absolutely took for granted before. Relentless Inquisitor, 5% haste, and Sanctuary, 5% damage reduction. You know, these are pretty much just locked in all the time. Like standard talent setup for a paladin here. You take Sanctuary over here on the right-hand side, and you're taking Relentless Inquisitor right here. And those have now been moved into the bottom third, where they're competing with the likes of Gift of the Golden Valkyr and Empyrean Authority. Pretty hard to beat those. There's no way they're taking like the place of Sentinel or Final Stand, especially now that Sentinel doesn't cause you to lose that crit chance either. Like, you still get damage and healing. You're not going to want to give that up, right? You probably don't want to give up Zealot's Paragon. That's a pretty huge damage increase. So the only thing that you could really consider giving up to take either Relentless Inquisitor or Sanctuary would either be Righteous Protector, which is, it makes your main cooldown, Sentinel, be available way more often. I don't think you want to give that up. Or you could have to give up Sweeping Verdict, which is like pretty fun chaining like damage on Judgment. It's an option to maybe give that up for the haste, just for the damage value, but I don't know that you're giving that up for Sanctuary. But ultimately, that doesn't really seem like a bad trade, right? Like, if you're losing 5% damage reduction from Sanctuary and gaining 10% damage from Seal of Reprisal, that's still like a 5% damage reduction buff in your favor, right? There's also just some other talents that are a lot more easily accessible now, like Uther's Council. You know, this may not be mandatory, but it's something that you can very easily fit in now instead of having to kind of fish around in the bottom section of the tree down here before, where it's not really useful for travel. So ultimately we'll spend more time playing around with this as we go into the coming patch and just continue through the PTR cycle. But this is a set of changes to the Prot Paladin tree that makes the sides of the tree make a lot more sense. You know, the left hand side is much more oriented toward Avenger Shield, and the right hand side is oriented more toward like self-healing and consecration. It also just makes it so that you get a lot more defensive value online earlier in the tree and kind of as a mandatory thing. And that's really good because it fixes the biggest thing that Prot Paladin has had problems with in this expansion, having no damage reduction. So it does seem like that issue's kind of fixed, and there's real potential to go like super tanky if you wanted to really just crank all of your points into damage reduction. Over on the right hand side, I mean, you know, there's a lot of investment maybe required, but to like get Sanctuary and Seal of Reprisal, have 15% DR all the time just out of this right hand side of the tree, that's pretty good. So ultimately, yeah, it looks like Prot Paladin may be a tank on the rise. You know, we're not 100% convinced that they're going to overtake Brewmaster or Bear Druid just on the strength of this talent shuffle alone. But if they maybe look at their tier set and give that some more tweaks as well, you never know. Alright, that's it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and finally thank you to all of our channel members. If you want to support us and help us make more WoW content, consider becoming a channel member as well. Thanks for watching. Bye.